Now, if your daughter had been awake, would she come in and say goodbye to you before school or not? Just let you sleep?
I would have hoped she would have come by and say goodbye to me. I can't remember if this is one of the first times that Stefan actually took her to school, so I would have hoped she would have said good night, but I'm not sure.
I just put that audio out as a YouTube short because I thought it was significant when they asked her if Maddie normally went in and said good morning. And after a lot of fapping around, she admitted that it would normally be the case for Maddie to say good morning to her. So she says, I would have hoped she would have. But when you actually listen to what's going on here, there is so much going on in this one little bit of audio. I'm going to play it again and listen very carefully to what's going on. And then I'm going to break it down for you.
Now, if your daughter had been awake, would she come in and say goodbye to you before school or not? Just let you sleep?
I would have hoped she would have come by and say goodbye to me. I can't remember if this is one of the first times that Stefan actually took her to school, so I would have hoped she would have said good night, but I'm not sure.
Now, that was a fairly direct question, and one that should have been really easy for her to answer, particularly when you consider that this is the morning that her daughter apparently went missing. This is that time frame when she lost her daughter. You would think that would be etched permanently in her brain. But when asked if her daughter had been awake, would she have come in to say goodbye before school or just let you sleep? She starts with I, and there's a long pause. Why did she need to pause there? That should be an automatic response. She should know what the normal behaviour is there. This wasn't a, did she do it that morning? This is this standard what she would normally do? So she should be able to straight out say, yeah, normally she would come in and say goodbye. But there was a long pause. She was thinking about what to say. And she comes out with, I would have hoped she would have come by and say, and then she giggles goodbye to me. So she hasn't even answered the question directly. She says, I would have hoped she would have come by. She's not giving an affirmative or a negative answer here. She's avoiding answering the question. But she's inferring that yes, normally Maddie would go in and say goodbye to her. She doesn't want to answer that though, because then she's admitting that she must have known something was wrong from the very start. She's admitting that she should have been calling out and asking what the hell's going on when she got up at 9 o'clock supposedly that morning. She's admitting that had she been a decent parent, had she woken up and discovered that her daughter hadn't said goodbye before going to school, that she didn't then turn around and send a text message to her daughter saying, well, good morning. And they actually hinted that a little bit later on. And I can see where they're going with that now. This is one area in the interview where they do carefully back away from the line of questioning, and I think that the reason they did this is because this is something that they don't want to be accused of at a later date. If they decide to press charges against Jennifer Soto, they want to be able to say, well, this isn't something that was brought up in the interview with her where she had immunity. This is something that through our investigative processes we came across. So we do have a leg to stand on, basically, in terms of prosecution. But for her to try and avoid a really basic answer, I would have hoped she would have come by to say goodbye to me, instead of, well, yeah, normally she would come and say goodbye to me. And then there is this extra long pause. She goes, huge pause. I can't remember if this was one of the first times that Stefan took her to school. So I, huge pause again, would have hoped. So she goes back to the I would have hoped. Once again, not talking about routines. According to Stefan, he has taken her to school on a few occasions. So, and even with Jen saying one of the first times, even she's acknowledging here, this is not the first time when supposedly Stearns had taken Maddie to school. So there is precedent there. Maddie had been dropped off at school in the past by Stearns, according to both Jen and Maddie. So it should be an easy enough question to answer. On those occasions when Stearns dropped your daughter off at school, did she come in to see you first and say goodbye, good morning, or whatever? But Jen has very carefully skipped around giving an answer. Now, I'm going to play the audio one more time, because what she says at the very end, to me, is the biggest red flag of all. Have a listen and see if you spot it.
Now, if your daughter had been awake, would she come in and say goodbye to you before school or not? Just let you sleep?
I would have hoped she would have come by and say goodbye to me. I can't remember if this is one of the first times that Stefan actually took her to school, so I would have hoped she would have said good night, but I'm not sure.
So the last thing that she said there, I would have hoped she would have said good night, but I'm not sure. That is a huge, huge red flag to me. I think that that was actual leakage there, and that there is a truth that has come out. I suspect that the interviewers caught that and chose not to comment on it because they want to look into that a little bit more. But to me, that is a red flag. One of the things I had speculated before, and now I know that investigators have said that they believe that what happened to Maddie happened in the early hours of the morning. So perhaps what I'm speculating here isn't quite accurate, but we know that Maddie had been home alone with Stearns for roughly 2 hours before Jen got home. And in one account, we hear her saying, well, you know, I got home and Stearns had already got her ready for bed. He had messaged me and said that she was nesting or something like that. And the way she described it made it sound like she had got home and Maddie had already gone to bed. And in this interview from the other day, she talks about coming home and sitting in her bedroom and having a pub sub as a late dinner before going to bed and before sending Maddie and Stearns off to bed half an hour later. And she claims that they were in her room with her for half an hour, looking at Maddie's presents, counting her money, yada yada yada. Is it possible that Jen did not see Maddie at all that evening? That perhaps either Maddie had already gone to bed. Now, she said that she had allowed Maddie to take her own medication that evening. Perhaps Stearns had administered some kind of medication to Maddie before Jen got home, and perhaps Maddie was knocked out. Perhaps that is the reason why Jen is saying, I would have hoped she would have said goodnight, but I'm not sure. I think she has genuinely slipped up here and given away the fact that she may not have actually spoken to her daughter the night before, on that Sunday night. Is it possible that this story of I sent them upstairs to sleep together isn't quite accurate? Was Maddie already knocked out somewhere when Jen Soto got home from work that evening? Was Maddie perhaps already deceased? Possibly not, if we go by the timeline given by law enforcement. And I tend to follow that timeline because, as morbid as it sounds, if you consider that it takes 12 hours for rigor to set in completely, 12 hours would mean that he would have had a very difficult time placing her in the vehicle in the morning had she been deceased that early on. So I think that is why law enforcement are confident in saying early hours of the morning, because it is based on him moving her into the vehicle and also later moving her into the boot. And obviously there'll be other factors that they can look at that would give a timeline. So to me the question is Jen Soto lying about having seen her daughter when she got home from work that night? Is her story about sending Stearns and Maddie off to sleep together inaccurate? What is she trying to hide if that is the case? Let me know your thoughts on this. Do you think it is a leaked truth? Or do you think Jen is just so messed up on drugs that she doesn't know what she's talking about? Do you think that in the future we may see Jen Soto charged with something?